Are we currently at war with China? And could we potentially be at war with the United States if we elect another liberal government? Well, Steve Bannon thinks so, and he makes a pretty compelling argument. Welcome to my channel, y'all. I hope you're having a great day. Well, Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun sat down with Steve Bannon, and for most people know who Steve Bannon is, but for those of you who don't, he's a former reporter, but he also has worked very closely with President Trump. And he probably knows as much about how President Trump thinks as anybody other than the president himself. So I know a lot of people have some negative things to say about Steve Bannon, but he is fairly articulate. And in this interview, he goes into what the whole deal is behind Trump wanting to annex the Panama Canal, purchase the Greenland, and then even absorb Canada. So let's go to that interview and just see what's behind Trump's thinking.
What is the motivation behind all of these different actions that Donald Trump is taking?
Days of thunder?
Yeah, whether it's Canada or Panama or Greenland, I keep hearing people say, there's no relation, it doesn't make any sense. And I say, well, I don't get the Canadian angle yet. Maybe you can explain it to me, but I get a lot of the other angles because I look at it and I see he's trying to combat China.
Well, you look at just in that's of a whole piece. It makes total geostrategic and geoeconomic sense. And this ties to what's happened the last 24 or 48 hours in Europe with Pete Hegseth and Scott Bessent over with NATO. What President Trump laid out in what I call the Panama to Greenland is kind of Alfred Mahan's naval strategy to say he's going to look at hemispheric defense, kind of Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And that's going to be from taking back the Panama Canal to make sure the Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy can never hook up in the Caribbean, all the way up to Greenland. And remember, Greenland, if you control Greenland or in partnership with a free Greenland and have bases there like we've had in World War II, there it was to keep the sea lanes open. Here is to close the sea lanes against Russian fast attack and ballistic missile submarines coming out of the Arctic, out of both Murmansk and Archangel. If you control that sea lane between Greenland and Iceland, which the United States will do, and not just have tracking sonobuoys, but actually control it with naval forces, and you control the Panama Canal, you've essentially hermetically sealed the United States from attack by the Soviets, by the Russians. If you add then Canada geostrategically, because the new great game, and the great game people should know, was this strategic contest in the 19th century between the British Empire and the Russian Empire through Afghanistan and Persia for access to warm water ports and to access to India, which Britain was trying to stop. The new great game of the 21st century is going to be the Arctic. It's already a great power struggle between the Chinese Communist Party and the Russians up there. Canada's former most secure border, your northern provinces, are now your soft underbelly.
So my interpretation of that is he's talking about the territories, not actually the provinces, but he's saying that is our weak spot. That is where China can take over. And he goes on about this for quite a while. So basically, this is about hemispheric security. So to secure the northwestern hemisphere. So that's Trump's major concern. And we get into talking really about how both Canada and the U.S. have been infiltrated by China, but how Canada is far, far worse.
And so what President Trump is saying is that if you look at the entire picture, everywhere from the 3 island chains in the Pacific, that would just guarantee that the Pacific became a natural barrier for Canada, coupled with what's happening in the Arctic, what the United States is going to do, coupled with Greenland and this hemispheric defense. There's such a compelling logic on both geostrategically and geoeconomically when you look at the combination of the markets. This is what President Trump, I think, is talking about tariffs. If you look at particularly your western provinces, for people in Canada, the western provinces of Canada are not that much different than Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas. It's that western frontier mentality with the same kind of natural resources, both agriculture and natural resources and oil and gas. So there's so many compelling logic, and President Trump's laying it out there. Don't look at Canada separate from Greenland and from Panama because it's of a whole piece.
So I think that's a very good point. This is a geostrategic and geoeconomic thing that Trump is harping on. He wants to take this whole Western Hemisphere and secure it. And Steve Bannon is making a very good point here as far as the Western Canada, the Western Canadian provinces, all the way up to the coast. Because except for the coast, the interior BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan are very much like the Western United States. And they do have that Western frontier mentality. Now, I can't speak too much about Manitoba. I'm not really familiar with their politics, other than that the fact that Wab Kinew is very, very much a leftist, and maybe that's where they lean. But economically and strategically, it does make a whole lot of sense.
This is for the Canadians too, on your defense budget, and particularly NATO. He said today with NATO that, and this goes for Canada, he says, hey, no offense, we bailed you out in World War I. We bailed you out in World War II. We bailed you out in the Cold War. You're just not a priority anymore. And the Russian army is kind of your problem. We'll still be there, but it's not vital national security interests. And the Canadian people, I think, have to have a deep conversation with themselves about the direction of the 21st century.
So what he's saying there is we can't be freeloaders anymore. We have to protect our own land. And he goes on to talk about how the Arctic is strategic, and President Trump doesn't want to let it fall into Russian or Chinese hands, but they've got their own strategic plan. Does that include absorbing Canada? Well, maybe, but that I think that there's more to it than that. I think that we could be economically and militarily aligned with them more so than we already are, because we're very much so now. But he's worried about that. We are essentially a security threat to the United States at the moment.
If you go back and look at the economics on both us as a unified market, geo-economically, if you look at the logic of us united geostrategically in a hemispheric defense, the logic speaks for itself. President Trump is not trolling people in this. I have people call me all day long. Is President Trump just trolling? Is President Trump just trolling
Canadians?
Canadians?
That's what it seemed like at the beginning.
Yes,
it
but
seemed like he was poking Justin Trudeau in the eye.
Although he refers to Trudeau as Governor Trudeau.
Yeah.
He is not, for the Canadian people. This is why I've decided in a very busy time to take this interview, because I have such respect for you and such respect for your paper. This is serious. President Trump I think of everything we're working on, that President Trump's working on, I think this hemispheric defense, which is Panama, it's also Latin America.
I found this next part of the interview very interesting, because now he goes into talking about how we're actually at war with China, and he draws a lot of similarities to the beginning of World War II, before people realized that they were actually at war with Nazi Germany. So let's take a look at this, and then we'll talk about it.
The part that a lot of Canadians would be scratching their heads at and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. There's no aggressive war with China. There's no, nothing with Russia. We don't have to be worried. We're past the point of needing to be worried about defense, is the view of a lot of people.
The view of anybody that thinks that is sound asleep. And let me wake them up. Number one, let's go back to World War II, of which, remember, Canada has shed more blood per capita than probably any democracy in the West in pursuit of freedom. Okay? The bravery and courage of the Canadian people can't be questioned. It's unbelievable what you guys have done. But I think now you got to think about, what was that all for? If you go back to World War II, if we're looking at the same place like in 1939 after the invasion of Poland, when the war really actually kind of got going, not the preamble to it, which was a long lead up, there were not that many casualties even through the fall of France. Look what's happened in Ukraine in 3 years, and we've been adamantly opposed to any involvement in Ukraine. It was ridiculous. As President Trump reiterated today, 1.5 million people have either been slaughtered or wounded in this war. 1 million Ukrainians and 750,000 Russian troops. Ukraine looks like Kiev. If you look at the carnage that's gone on, you throw in the Middle East, it's far greater than the early years of the Second World War, and we saw how that ended. If you also look at the Chinese Communist Party, unrestricted warfare, the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the United States since May of 1989. Xi said it, the People's War. They're doing it through cyber. They're doing it through political warfare. They're doing it through information warfare. They're doing
political interference in Canada.
Canada, you guys are much far. Look, as badly as we're infiltrated, Canada's actually worse. And Trudeau's exacerbated this. This is something the Canadian people got to wake up to. You're losing your sovereignty as you speak. That's why your crisis on your northern border. The irony in Canada, given everything through valor of arms and courage that you've defended, now what was always strategically your greatest, the thing you had greatest, which was your northern border and kind of the Arctic, now becomes your greatest exposure to actual losing territorial integrity and sovereignty, the Chinese Communist Party, which has already infiltrated Canada. Look at Huawei. Look at all the situations in Canada. They're at war just because, remember, in Chinese Communist Party doctrine, if they have to start shooting, like Sun Tzu, if they have to start shooting, they think the kinetic part, which has already started in Europe and Ukraine, the kinetic part of the war is where they don't want to take on the foreign devils, right? Because the foreign devils know how to man up and know how to fight. What they want to do is unrestricted warfare, is defeat the West even before any guns are fired. And they're quite far advanced in the United States, and I would argue they're farther advanced in Canada. So people sit there and go, well, we're not really at war. That's like people in Europe in 1930, in the summer of 1939, sitting there going, we're actually not at war. It's a beautiful summer here. And the clouds of war were all over them. They just couldn't see over the horizon.
So that's a pretty astute observation there. China believes that they are already at war with us. So, are we at war? I think we are. I think we're under attack. I think this whole fentanyl thing, I think all of the electronic surveillance, the balloons going overhead, and all of the political interference, I think that is very much so part of the war that China is waging against the West. We ought to really take notice of this.
It was around 2010. I think it was President Hu back then was coming to Canada. He was going to visit then Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Official visit, things had not changed. Even the bipartisan consensus in Washington still hadn't changed towards China. It has now, and it has in Canada. Well, maybe not for Trudeau's Liberals. But I remember reading a piece where Hu said, before he left, I mean, this was clearly a planted message to send to Canada as he was coming for a visit, that they view themselves as an Arctic nation, and they believe that they get the resources in the Arctic. They have a very different vision of the future of the Arctic than Canada or the United States does, and it includes them pillaging it.
So think of that. China is not an Arctic nation. They're nowhere near the Arctic, but they consider themselves to be an Arctic nation. They want our resources, and they're willing to take it. They're willing to pillage it. And that's not a friendly nation to Canada.
This is not just something that came to President Trump out of nowhere. This is the aggressiveness of the Chinese Communist Party in the Arctic. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Canada is going to be tested and lost in the northern provinces and around Canada. And he said it on a state visit. This was 14 years ago. And they've been laboring away long before then, but they've been laboring away since then. And they're a major Arctic power.
So China's been fighting us for over 14 years, and we didn't even know we were being attacked. That's kind of scary. They've got so many things going for them. They're so far ahead of the curve that we really need to step up.
Does President Trump believe that Canada does need to become a 51st state, or just grow up and act like we used to?
He spends his time, and particularly when he's communicating either the true social or what he's talking about, I think of everything he's working on. I tell people, I think the hemispheric defense, because it also underpins his new business model for the United States, which we are in a very tough financial situation. I tell people, I don't know if he's got a higher priority than hemispheric defense.
But does that necessarily mean, I mean, his latest word to describe it is absorbing Canada. Does that mean the United States has to absorb Canada, how do you work together?
The form of that is to be determined. Remember, President Trump is a master deal maker, but I do think, just like he's making a deal now about Ukraine and getting that war done, he's doing a deal in the Middle East to get that done. He's a deal guy. He's a deal guy.
And he has talked about Canada as much as he's talked about the Middle East, probably more lately than he's talked about Ukraine.
More. I tell folks that, okay, I say, see where he spends his time, See what his default position when he's got some free time. This thing about Greenland, Panama, and you have to look at it whole cloth. This is about hemispheric defense and what this market means to the world and what this market means to the citizens in this market. So he's obsessed with this issue of Canada. The Canadian people have to make up their mind about what they want to do and where they want to go and who they want to be affiliated with.
And that's one of the best points he makes here. We have to make up our mind. Who do we want to be affiliated with? Do we want to be taken over by China or Russia? Or would we rather be associated with the United States? Whether that's as an independent nation who, starts pulling its weight, or whether it's part of the United States. Those are two of the issues there. And he doesn't say that Trump actually wants to absorb Canada completely. He doesn't know what that's going to look like. That's yet to be determined. Remember that.
Those discussions and that debate should commence.
It might be having the reverse outcome of what he wanted, because conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was looking like he was going to form the next government. Now anger over this has a Mark Carney-led Liberal government tied or leading. And you could end up with a very left-wing environmental zealot who will win by campaigning against
a very left-wing environmental zealot like the government you've had will only lead Canada more rapidly to the edge of the abyss. Right, these people are radicals. They have these bizarre economic theories.
So he wants a carbon tariff on anything that comes from a country that doesn't have it. What would the reaction be in Washington to Canada saying, if your climate plan's not good enough, and the American one would not be good enough for Mark Carney, what would the reaction be to Canada putting a carbon tariff on every import that we have from you?
I think it would be a complete rethinking here in the country about what our relationship is with Canada. I think that if you did that, you would essentially say that we're a hostile power. I think it would be reviewed by the American people as that. I think it would be reviewed by people in Washington as that. And I think it would be reviewed by President Trump as that.
So we could be on the verge of being labeled as a hostile power or thought of as a hostile power by the United States if we elect Mark Carney. That, I think, is actually a reasonable reaction to Mark Carney, because really he is radical and he won't work well with the president of the United States. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to know what you think. Put your comments down below. And while you're at it, please like this video, share with your friends and on social media. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell notification so you never miss another video. Also, please join me on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific time for my live stream on both YouTube and Rumble, where you can join in on the conversation. This week, however, I won't be doing a live stream because I'll be out of town. Finally, if you want to get your Canadian firearms license, which is required to either possess or purchase a firearm in Canada, I teach the required courses. So if you reside on Vancouver Island and you want to take a course from me, there are links in the show notes of this video to my website where you can sign up to take one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.